Okay, so yesterday I listened to Inception, which is the first chapter of Project Horizons. So, one down, 79 to go! And oh boy, some of them are really long. The audiobook I listened to, the first chapter was about 2.5 hours. I think it was about 225, 226. It looks like most of Volume 1 is around an hour-ish each. Some are a little longer, some are a little shorter. And then I think once we get into Blood and Stars, that's when it starts being about 2:30 a pop, 2:45, 3 hours in some. So it's gonna be a while, but you know what they say about the journey of 1,000 miles. This is the journey of 1.8 million words. It belongs with a single step. It begins with a single step. So let's talk about its beginning and its first chapter. But before I do that, it is important that it's important that I reiterate, this is not a blind journey of 1.8 million words. I have read Horizons before. I know what's coming, and even in this first chapter, I made a list of a lot of moments or like lines or reactions that really stuck out to me, knowing the big picture, like, oh, this is in reference to this character's backstory, this is referencing this. There's a lot going on in the first chapter. So it is full spoilers for the chapter. It is full spoilers for all of Project Horizons, because throughout these I will be talking about the story as a whole. The first time I read this chapter, which was what, like 11, 12-ish, somewhere around there, years ago, I remember not liking it very much. I actually liken this chapter to the first episode of Madoka Magica, because the first time I watched that, and the first time I read this chapter, I wasn't impressed. I didn't dislike it. I thought it's fine. If this was my only impression, I mean, I guess technically it is my only impression. If I hadn't been told how good this was, I might not be as like, man, I gotta keep going. But I've heard good things about it. I'm interested in it. Let's keep going. But episode 1, chapter 1 is fine. And a lot like the first episode of Madoka, on a rewatch/reread, kind of like what I was saying earlier, I see a lot of the foundation being laid and a lot of the groundwork being laid. I've like 4 pages worth of notes on my laptop. I'm sorry, I'm gonna be looking back and forth. There's times where I'm just kind of gonna be reading from a script. I'm sorry. But, yeah, like I was saying, in hindsight, there's a lot that it sets up. Some of it is pretty obvious. We get to meet Blackjack for the first time. We get to meet P21 for the first time. EC1101, which is our main MacGuffin, is introduced. We get to meet Deus. And I'll go ahead and say right now, it's a name that I often pronounce, like while reading it, I often just pronounced as Deuce. I know that's wrong. It's just how I like to say it. But over the years of talking about it, because one of my favorite hobbies, you can ask Clay, is talking about Project Horizons, I've gotten way more used to calling him Deus, so sometimes I'll say Deus, sometimes I'll say Deuce. But it introduces our first major baddie in the series. A decent amount of groundwork shit there is laid. It also introduces, I feel like the events of this chapter are kind of a microcosm of what Project Horizons is, particularly when it stands on its own merits. There's a lot, it's a fucking story about ponies. There's a lot of sex, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of sexual violence. And it feels weird to say, I don't mind the sex. I'm not crazy about it. I'm like, oh boy, a sex scene. There's a lot of them in Horizons. I mean, that's a big part of Blackjack's character. It is what it is. I don't love it, but I'm like, I get it. It's fine. I kind of love a lot of the violence. Like, even in this chapter, that, by the way, I'll go and say this now. I'm also making a kill count for Project Horizons as we go. Shout out to the Dead Meat channel. It's one of my favorites on YouTube. It's not what inspired me to reread Horizons, but I kind of thought to myself, with kill counts on the brain, I'm kind of interested to know how many people die in this story, and in particular, I want to know how many people Blackjack is responsible for dying. not always for killing herself. I don't know how many deaths I would say she didn't kill but are on her off the top of my head. One that I can bring up is Scootle, which I think it comes up soon. I think that's before Glory, so I think that's chapter 2 or 3, maybe 4. That's one of those where Blackjack didn't kill her. Blackjack is the reason she died. I will put that on Blackjack's personal body count. But there's probably others, like when we get to Priest, that's one where, and Dusty Trails, Blackjack blames herself for those because of her beef with Sanguine. I'm not putting those on Blackjack's body count. It's a case-by-case basis when it comes to some of those, and I'll probably talk through them when we actually get to them. But generally speaking, I kind of like how violent the story is. Maybe I'm just an asshole, but I don't know. I think there's probably going to be some moments where it goes a little bit too far. But when you see a pony start running and then they just explode, I'm like, that's kind of fucking cool. What's the line from Incredibles? Come on, you gotta admit this is cool. We get sex, we get violence, but like I said, you also get sexual violence. And that is something I'm just not a fan of. I don't like reading it. I don't like how prevalent it becomes throughout the story. There's times where I feel like it's important, and you can see the genuine impact it has on the characters. For example, looking way ahead when we get to 33, and what happens to Blackjack, and the way she views sex, particularly with stallions, in part 3, and it actually becomes a major aspect of her character. You get, P21 and his entire backstory of being a sex slave, being a breeder, and how that is something that has affected him. And then here we get the Overmare gets raped on screen. Daisy, it's she got sodomized off screen, and okay, it doesn't, from what I remember, and we'll revisit that for sure when we hit 22, I don't remember how much that actively affected their characters. It feels more of this is a really dark, grimdark story, so yeah, right here in chapter 1, we're gonna have rape and talk about rape. I'm I don't particularly like this. Another kind of microcosm element of Project Horizons that we get in the first chapter is talking about mysteries and conspiracies. Here, we have the fact that the Overmare is in charge of the stable, but she's butting heads with Rivets, who is the head of all the maintenance mares, and it seems like she's starting to plot a coup, and the Overmare is I don't know if I'd say coup is the right word, but she is, I kind of want to take care of all my I guess it's, Rivets wants to pull a coup, the Overmare wants to pull a cull. And you also have Blackjack and P21 going through some of the audio logs and duct tape and trying to find this special program that's been encrypted and figuring out why it's so important. And that's going to be a big deal throughout the entire story. But figuring out why it's so important, the fact that there's someone on the outside who's calling them saying, we need this program, but no one on the outside is supposed to be alive. Mysteries, conspiracies. You know what's in this chapter? There's talks of loyalty. There's not as much love, but there's definitely secrets. Bit of a microcosm of what Project Horizons is. What it, again, when it's standing on its own merits. And also I had said there's a lot of other things that I noticed, oh, that's something that's really interesting, the full knowledge of the series. That's something that's interesting, the full knowledge of the series. We'll get to that in a bit. Again, there's a list. So, getting into the actual plot of the chapter, when you kind of step back, it's nothing too crazy. It actually feels like a very standard first episode, first chapter of kind of anything. You have, here's your main character, here's your introduction to them, here's their base personality, here's their setting, here's an average everyday life in the life of Blackjack. She meets someone, P21, who ends up becoming really important in her life and changing her life and her outlook on the world forever. Some shit happens, that being Deus and the Raiders and the gangsters that he brings with them to attack 99. Now that her world has been thrown upside down and everything's going topsy-turvy, she and her new friend have to escape with this MacGuffin, that being EC-1101, and starting their adventure. It's pretty simple, it's pretty standard, it's not bad. Like, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I remember texting Clay at one point, I'm like, I'm not done with the chapter yet, but it kind of fucks. Like, and it really was just all of those moments and realizing there's a lot of interesting shit that is being alluded to, it's being set up, that's being foreshadowed, and I'm getting a lot more from Blackjack in chapter 1 than I was honestly expecting, or at least that I appreciated the first time around, and I want to get into that. There's a couple characters I really want to talk about from chapter 1. The first and most obvious is Blackjack herself. The second, it's not P21, it's Deuce. And we'll get to him later, because I've got to start with my girl Blackjack. So, I remember the first time I read this chapter, I had said, like, it wasn't something I was overly impressed with. I think part of it was the formula. It's like, okay, like, it's fine, it's nothing crazy. Part of it was also, Blackjack didn't leave a good first impression on me. I remember just looking at her, reading it, but just thinking, you're just, I don't want to say Little Pip 2.0, because that sounds like you'd be an improvement on Little Pip. You're kind of Little Pip 0.5. Like, let's see, you're both from a stable, you're both unicorns, you're both only good at telekinesis, you're both very interested in a darker, like, not like brooding dark, like color dark unicorn that's not interested in you. Both of you are interested in girls, although with Little Pip, it is she is straight up a lesbian. With Blackjack is like, hey, anything that moves, I'm into. I always kind of read it as she has a preference for women, but can swing both ways. I remember there's, you get a thing later where she'll frequently say, like, man, there's just something about flyers, which leads to a pretty fun, I don't know if rock, paper, scissors is the right word. It's not really a love triangle, but you got Blackjack saying, man, there's something about flyers, and then Glory saying, man, there's something about earth ponies, and then you got P21 going, there's just something about unicorns. I really like these three. It's, again, I have my problems with Blackjack, and I'm genuinely hoping, reading the series again, seeing where it's going, listening to someone else's take on her, because for me, I often read Blackjack as being very whiny and annoying, which made her very annoying to read, so I didn't like her. I'm genuinely hoping that someone else reading her will make me appreciate her a lot more. But just these three and the way they interact off each other and play off each other, especially when we get to part 4, I really fucking loved. But with her first impression, I was like, this just feels like Little Pip, except also really dumb and kind of useless. Okay, I guess this is what we're doing with our main character. And rereading it, yes, I can, and again, I'm trying to look at this more in a vacuum rather than it's the other big Fallout Equestria story, although there's definitely points. Okay, I'll say it like this. When it's making those active comparisons to the original story, I won't be able to help it. In something like this, where it's similar but not actively saying, I'm better than the original story kind of shit, I can more forgive it. And Blackjack, on her own merits, I feel like there is a lot to say, and quite a bit that I do like. Number one, girl's funny as hell. Like, just the scene of her with the hoof cuffs on her, like, trying to hobble around, going into the lunch table and be like, man, what a day I've had. You want to know what's going on? There I was, minding my own business, being such a likable person. And what do you know? These handcuffs just fucking appeared on me out of nowhere. Isn't that wild? But I was just thinking, who is someone who could help me out of this predicament? And then I see you, one of the smartest, kindest, most wonderful people I know, and surely someone as smart and wonderful and kind as you would help a friend. Like, she's just fun. She's just entertaining. Like, this is why for years I'm like, I have my problems with Blackjack, but I can't hate Blackjack. Because when she can just be herself, she's so damn likable. We also get to something I think works in this chapter that I'm really going to be paying attention to as the story goes on. Partially because the story's kind of going to make me pay attention to it. And it's Blackjack's hesitation to kill people. Over the course of the story, she has several catchphrases. And I will go ahead and say, I also am doing a catchphrase count, too. She has 4 big ones, at least that I remember. There is, I am not a smart pony. Ante up, which was my personal favorite. Like, anytime she was like, all right, ante up, I got hyped as fuck. Those 2, security saves ponies, and I'm not an executioner. Those are her 4 big ones. It's notable to me, especially in hindsight, the first one that she says is, I'm not an executioner. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit with Blackjack's character. But it is something that you see throughout the story of, I could kill this person, and I probably should, but I'm not going to, because that's not who I am. I'm not an executioner. She will kill, because I will say, I can understand it's self-defense, it's the heat of the moment, you gotta do what you gotta do, compared to, let me put it like this. I feel like in this chapter, her hesitation to kill these gangsters and like the crazy raiders is very understandable because it's not something she's ever had to do. Even though it's something she has done. Because we get that later. I don't remember what chapter that is. I want to say it's like 13. It's somewhere when she's by herself in Arc 1 in Security Mare, when she is listening to those audio files of her beating P21's lover to death right in front of him. And it's so interesting to me that it's something she doesn't even remember. She talks about how there's an incident, and I'm gonna be honest, I'm not sure what she's talking about. I'm not sure if it's that, when she beat the hell out of that stallion. I know there's a point in 99's history where the stallions all like grouped together, tried to overthrow the Overman, it didn't work. I don't know if it's that, because I don't remember if that's something Blackjack was alive for, if that was way back in the day for 99. There's this other incident, I believe it's when she got her cutie mark, when there was a mare that got crushed by a pair of doors or something. There's a few with Blackjack, and as we go on, there's gonna be a lot more incidents with Blackjack. But there's a moment in the story, or excuse me, in the chapter, where she talks about how she views death. And for her in 99, I don't really think about death. It's just kind of, someone's here, then the next day they're gone. And that's it. Which I feel like is why it's one of the 2 reasons why I think it's so easy for her to forget what she did to that male. The other, I think he was like the previous P21, or maybe he was a previous U21. I don't remember if he was a unicorn or not. Knowing P21, he's like, there's something about unicorns. It might have been a U21. But anyways, there's the fact that for her, it's like, you're here today, gone tomorrow. It just kind of is what it is. There's also the fact that she very clearly sees stallions as subhuman. She talks about how, stallions aren't smart enough to do anything like this. Like, okay, here's what, like, a mare would do. Here's what a smart person would do. But he can't do that. Or it's like when he starts, like, picking at the lock. I think also he's fucking with the terminal. He's like, how the fuck does a male know how to do this? I don't know how to do this. You mean there's a stallion smarter than me? Like, I know I'm dumb. Which, to be fair, she gets close a few times, but she never actually says I'm not a smart pony in this chapter, so it didn't actually appear on the counter. She's like, man, even the man is smarter than me. What the hell? Like, it's funny, but it also gets into the way she views the world, how 99 has conditioned her. And I do find that interesting. But when she is face to face with a gangster and has a gun in her hand, she's like, I can do it when they attack me first, when it's pure self-defense and heat of the moment. But being the aggressor, this feels wrong. I don't know about this. I don't like this. And then as soon as she gets attacked, she pulls the trigger, which, to be fair, is also her like, it was kind of luck that I pulled. I don't know what the hell happened. I almost blacked out for a second. But it is a recurring aspect of Blackjack's character. I will defend myself, and even sometimes I will be the aggressor. But I don't want to just kill people, even though I've killed a lot of people. And it's an aspect of her character I really want to like. The idea of a pacifist existing in a world that does not allow you to be a pacifist. And there's shit you have to do in order to survive. And her trying her damnedest to keep a hold of her morality, but she just can't. Again, like with Worm, and how you have a character like Taylor who can always make exceptions. It's like, hey, I know this was kind of fucked up, but it's okay. Like, yeah, I gouged out his eyes. They grew back. It's fine. Yeah, I killed that guy, but he was a piece of shit. It's not that big of a deal. I think my problem with it, from what I remember, is a couple things. It's number one, there are times, especially later in the story, where I'm like, Blackjack, I understand your hesitancy, especially early on, but I feel like we've kind of gotten past this at this point in the story, where you understand that you need to take care of this person because of how much of a problem they are, and then Blackjack will go, yeah, but nah, I'm not gonna do that. I'm like, but why? It feels like you're not killing them, less because of your morality, although it's part of it, and more because they still have more in the story to do, and once they've done that, they could be taken care of. That was the vibe I got. The other problem I had with it is, Blackjack, for someone who's not an executioner, you have a body count. And like I was saying earlier, it's a big reason why I want to count the kills in Project Horizons. How high does it get? I want to know, does Blackjack hit 1,000? Because on the one hand, because I was talking to Clay about it, I was like, there's no way. Like, that's a big number. That is an insane number. Then, well, 22 is a lot. Like, in chapter 22, not just 22. 22 is a lot of people, don't get me wrong. Like, okay, in chapter 22, that's a lot. And then in chapter 6, that's a lot. Those two together, you're halfway home, Blackjack. And I did the numbers. If you exclude the more or less 500 between 6 and 22, 78, or like 500 divided by 78, I think the number was like 6.5. So if throughout the rest of the story, she averages 6.5 kills, she might make it. And to be fair, like, I'm not going to be counting things like a rad roach or a rad scorpion. Like, no, like, you can do that. That's fine. Does she kill 1,000 ponies and zebras and diamond dogs, like the sentient races? I'm not sure if I'm going to count the Zodiac clones in part 5, because I genuinely don't remember how sentient they were. And that'll be kind of when we get to it, I'll be like, no, like this, they just feel like mindless monsters, they don't count, or maybe they have a lot more character and personality. They just kind of hide it because they're mooks, but it's there. We'll see. I also don't remember because I remember on the moon, there was like a whole bunch of people there. I think they were blanks. I believe they were sentient, I don't remember if they died, like, when the base got fucked up, like, when Rampage was fucking melting and shit, which that was gnarly as hell. So, those might count, which might be a big boost in her number. Dude, Blackjack's KDR is crazy, man. And I want to know how crazy it gets. Because for someone who says, I'm not an executioner, I refuse to do this, the evidence kind of speaks for itself. And that was one of my big problems reading Blackjack. And maybe, just maybe, when I read through it again, I'll be more forgiving of her hesitancy and her pacifism. I genuinely hope that I am, because I want to like Blackjack. I don't want to be annoyed by the main character, but she and I have a lot of history together. It hasn't always been good, but maybe it'll be okay.
Let's see, I talked about that.
Oh, there's also a few times where Blackjack's like, man, Blackjack, you don't have time to be whiny. You don't have time to be like, woe is me. I'm like, that's okay, baby girl. There's going to be 79 more chapters. You are going to have a lot of time to do that. It made me laugh. I hated it, but it made me laugh.
Another thing I want to bring up about Blackjack is her relationship with her mom.
And as much as I said that her early impression, she kind of feels like a clone of Little Pip, this is one of the big deviations between her and Little Pip. Little Pip's mom, from what I remember, they didn't have a great relationship because her mom was a drunk who didn't really give a shit. Here, Blackjack has a complicated, estranged relationship with her mom, not because she doesn't care, but because her mom is wearing two hats. She is the head of security. She has to be a very stern, no-nonsense, all-business kind of mare at all times. She also wears the hat of being Blackjack's mom. And, like, I love my kid. I adore my kid. I want to baby her because I love her, and I know, like, she's not as good as, like, she's kind of dumb. She's very bad at magic. Her horn's a little bit smaller than everyone. It's not small, Mom. It's compact, okay? And Jin Rummy is not in the story very long. This is unfortunately the only chapter we see her alive outside of, like, flashbacks and whatnot. But I remember the first time I read it, she left a big impact on me. It's like, I don't know why. I really like Jin Rummy. And it is because of that dichotomy. Like, you see when the stable's in danger, she's ready to go. Like, she's got a... like, Blackjack almost gets killed by a dude, and that dude gets fucking glocked. She is ready to kick ass. She is also fiercely protective and loving of her daughter. And I think you do see in some other flashbacks just that I have to be hard on my daughter because I need her to be strong. I need her to catch up because she is going to be the head of security after me. Every position in 99 is inherited, and we have not the most important, we have one of the most important, and if Blackjack can't do that job, the stable is fucked. And you got Blackjack saying, dude, I'm not gonna be able to do the job. Hopefully Mom is gonna outlive me. Hopefully at some point, like, I'll die and she can have a kid that's actually good. I didn't even really think about that, but that's a really interesting sentiment. Because it's kind of said in a more, like, funny, jovial kind of way. But it gets to one of the big aspects of Blackjack's character, which is her depression. It is her lack of self-worth and self-esteem. And hearing Blackjack almost casually being like, dude, Mom's gonna outlive me. I'm fucking useless. It is what it is. And remembering what happens after she goes back to 99, I'm like, fuck, that hits kind of hard. Like, you poor girl, Blackjack. Where are we at? We're at already 30 minutes and I'm not even done with Blackjack. Because there's one other thing I want to talk about with Blackjack. It's kind of a lot, but it is something I really want to bring up here. Actually, I'm going to get a quick drink of water. Oh, I knocked this over. I am really glad that was closed, or else my laptop would have been fucked. Oh, that was actually really good. That was refreshing as fuck. The other thing I want to say about Blackjack here is her virtue is on full display. And from what I remember, Blackjack's virtue is never explicitly stated within Project Horizons, and I also don't think in any of Somber's author's notes. It's possibly something he's said on like a post somewhere, making a call-out post on his Twitter.com. Sorry, I've been watching that fucking Eggman's announcement video so much the past couple weeks. I rediscovered it and it cracks me up every time. Anyways, Blackjack's virtue is never explicitly stated, and while reading Project Horizons, I had a few different theories. At one point, I considered maybe Blackjack's virtue is that she is generosity, because we never got an element of generosity in the original Fallen Equestria, and given how Horizons is, how a lot of times it's like, hey, I'm going to be the story to answer the unanswered questions from the original, and even things that had answers and didn't need more information on, I'm going to supply that extra information on. There's a surprising amount of restraint by the end, because the element of generosity is never stated. I feel like it's probably kind of hinted that it's charity, but she never actually gets it. Or at least it's never confirmed by the end, although by the end, Whisper is the element of magic, which is so bizarre and ludicrous. It honestly feels like self-parody rather than a good conclusive ending. I talked earlier in the last video, I was like, I think the epilogue is fucking awful, and yeah, I think it is. Maybe I'll reread it and somehow, like, I'll have that Danny DeVito moment of, I get it now, but I'm really not expecting to come around on the epilogue. But while reading the story through the first time, I was like, is Blackjack going to be the element of generosity? Because it's probably going to be someone. You could make an argument that she's generous with how much she gives to the Wasteland and how much of herself she gives to her Wasteland, especially by the end of 62 when she's given up her physical body and she's become a full cyborg by, like, she's not forced into, like, at the end of 33, start of 34, this is by her own will of, it's what I need to do to save the world, I'm going to give this up. You can also make an argument with her being a pacifist and her showing mercy. You can argue that giving someone mercy and giving them another chance is an act of generosity. Now, even reading it, it's like, I feel like this is a reach. I genuinely don't think this is where it's going, but maybe it is. My other big theory for a good while, this was kind of my first main one of what I thought Blackjack's virtue was perseverance. Which, shout out to that, because I think it's one of the big themes of Project Horizons. The two big ones for me are second chances and perseverance. Not giving up. When, like, you have to find your motivation, you have to find your why. Whatever it takes for you to get up off the mattress, you have to hold on to that and not give up. There's a lot of points in Project, maybe not a lot, I honestly think it's like 2 or 3, but they were really notable to me, so I mention them all the time, where characters will talk to Blackjack, learn all the shit she's went through, and go, oh, that's so sad, man, I thought Little Pip had it bad, and it pissed me the fuck off, pissed the hell out of me. It's like, yeah, Little Pip did have it rough, this doesn't have to be a competition. And it made me really annoyed it made me annoyed at Blackjack, even though it's not really Blackjack's fault. I don't want that to diminish the fact that Blackjack goes through a lot. Physically, mentally, emotionally, in her relationships. There is a lot that she goes through and a lot that she loses, but she still keeps going. There are even points where she gives up. but she still keeps going. She is one tenacious son of a bitch. And I feel like perseverance is a really good pick for what her virtue is. However, I think there's a better one. And that's the one that you really see in the first chapter. And thinking about it more, it's like this really is the core tenet of who Blackjack is. It is her sense of duty. Blackjack, like her of her 4 catchphrases, I felt like by the end of the story, there were 2 that she seemed to repeat more than the others. Like, I'm not a smart pony. You got it a lot in the beginning, and then it kind of fizzled out. Ante Up, I remember a lot in the beginning and in the middle, and then it kind of fizzled out. But you heard a lot of I'm not an executioner, and you heard a lot of security saves ponies. She is security. Which, by the way, I think is kind of a badass nickname. I always kind of thought that, like just people refer to her like as security throughout this. Like, I don't know. That's kind of badass. But it's in her DNA. It's what she does. It's what her mom did, and her mom, and her mom, and her mom. I can't say etc., 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 because Twilight Sparkle didn't work security. But down the line, eventually, that's, you know, what's in her DNA. And even as Blackjack in chapter 1 is like, dude, I don't like working security. I think this shit sucks. I hate the duty. I hate the responsibility. I hate that my dumb ass has to do this. Hate that my lazy ass has to do all this work. When push comes to shove, when the metal meets the road, when she sees Daisy and Marmalade beating the fuck out of P21, what does she say? I have to stop this because security saves ponies. She antes the fuck up. When P21's like, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna kill me? That's who you are. You're a fucking murderer. And knowing what I know, he's not wrong to say that. What does Blackjack say? I'm not an executioner. Because it is the antithesis to what being security is. And if security is her duty, I have to protect people. I have to keep people safe. Killing them is not what I do. That's not protecting. That's not keeping people safe. Also, like with EC 1101, I feel like this is my duty because I'm the dumbass who took it out of the stable. And if that's what I did, it's on me. And then there's a bit later. I don't remember when she gets Vanity's guns. I want to say that's... Okay, let me actually think about this. They deal with Blue Blood in Volume 2, because that's when they get Thorn, because that's what... I don't think that's the first time they go... It's definitely not the first time they go to Chapel, because that's in Part 1. But they go there in Part 2, and that's when the Angel shows up, I believe for the first time, with Rampage and Thorn. It's during that encounter with Blue Blood, I think in the family mansion, that's when she gets the memory orb about Vanity. I think that's when she gets his password. So it might actually be in Part 2 that she gets his guns. Maybe it's in Part 3. But it's a pair of pistols. It's duty and sacrifice. Sacrifice is Little Pip's virtue. Is Little Pip's virtue from the end of Fallout Equestria. So I feel like pairing it with duty is like, this is Little Pip and this is Blackjack. And yeah, like I said, it is to me the core tenet of who Blackjack is. And you do see it as early as chapter 1, which is kind of what I was saying earlier. In hindsight, the first chapter does a lot more than I really gave it credit for. It's 40 minutes.
Hell yeah. Now we get to talk about the other character I really want to talk about. Good old Deuce. So, oh boy, I have a lot of notes here.
The other reason I remember not liking the first chapter when I first read it, I was like, this is just kind of Little Pip 2.0. I guess the chapter is kind of cool, but it feels kind of standard, which is something I more kind of appreciate now, being a little older. And also, man, I did not care for Deus. And it really just comes down to how he talks and what he says. Of course, his first word is cunt. It's his favorite word. He says it all the fucking time. It's like he has like in hindsight, he is introduced perfectly. Someone fucking explodes, and then when you look to the source of where the blast came from, you see this big, armored, mean-looking, unga-bunga son of a bitch just sitting there with a gun smoking, just saying, I don't remember exactly what the line is, something along the lines of like, cunt thought she was fast. Cunt was wrong. Because of course that's his first word. And the fact that like he just murdered someone and gave no shits, has no qualms about it whatsoever, you know that this is the top dog and this guy's a problem. It's great. But I just hate the way he talks because his sentence structure is like 4 words max. Like, there's this line from the Scott Pilgrim movie during the So Sad song where I think it's afterwards Wallace is like, hey guys, it's not a race. That's kind of how I feel whenever he talks. It has this very Tarzan way of speaking, which I get it. You know, he's a doofus. If you know the story, pun intended. He's a fucking doofus. But also, when you get into the story later and he has more scenes, he can fucking talk, and he's not like eloquent, but he can string sentences together that are more than just, I'm waiting, cunt, blah, blah, blah. Like, the more he talked, for me, the less intimidating he got in the chapters. Like, this guy's just fucking stupid. I don't like listening to him talk. It's this perfect introductory moment, and then, yeah, and again, even reading it in hindsight, I'm like, I still don't care for it, almost especially in hindsight, because that doesn't, again, it's his favorite word, but I feel like just the way he talks is weird in the first chapter, and maybe that's just my memory playing tricks on me, and when I actually get to more scenes with him, he'll be a lot more concise, I guess, with his sentence structure. But I don't know. I just didn't care for it. Blah, 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 blah. I mentioned in the last video, when I was talking about some of the things I really like in Horizons, I mentioned I really tend to like the major antagonists. And that, in my opinion, each of the major antagonists of the story represents one of Thomas Aquinas' 9 deadly sins. You have the classic 7, pride, greed, sloth, envy, lust, gluttony. Did I say greed? I did say greed. Fuck, who am I missing? Damn it. Oh shit, this is wrath. Thank you, I got it quick. You have the classic 7 plus sorrow and vanity. 8 guesses which of the 9 Deus represents. He, to me, is lust. The way that I interpret lust as a 7 deadly sin, it's not, while it's very commonly just associated with sex, I think it's a little more than that. It is the pleasure of the flesh. And I think, while with Deus it's the same thing, it has kind of a different meaning. It's not for him that, yeah, I have sex, and I have sex because I like the act of sex, because I like the power it gives me, although I think that's a big part of it too. It's because, as Blackjack notes, there's 2 things that Blackjack notes about him in this chapter. There's more than 2, but there's 2 that really stuck out to me. Number 1 is that Deus's body is entirely made of metal except for his dick. And 2, there's a point where she notes that this dude looks like he's in pain. And as we find out later, he is. He is literally in pain 24/7. The only thing that doesn't hurt is his dick, because it's the only thing that's not metal. The only thing he can do To release is have sex. It is to feel that pleasure of the flesh. And what's really interesting to me about that is like, wait a second. He has sex as a form of release. That's something that Blackjack does. It's not talked about a lot in chapter 1, although, Blackjack's like, look, I mean, I do things like I've fucked a lot of different people, blah, blah, blah. It's something they talk about later, especially with Glory, how sex is Blackjack's reset button. When Blackjack literally, like, post-nut clarity is a part of Blackjack. I actually just realized that for the first time. Post-nut clarity is a major part of Blackjack's character. And they describe it as her reset button. Like, when she gets really stressed, when she gets really depressed, it is something that helps her. Like, that's remarkably similar to Deuce. The big difference is Deus doesn't ask permission. He just does it. Which, part of his backstory, is a pretty meaningful, it's pretty meaningful that it's like that. Blackjack does not take advantage of people like that. It's taking advantage of, like, hey, I kind of need this, you got me, but never without anyone's consent. There's also this part, I think it's at the end of volume 1, where I think she fucks Caprice, and she has this, the way she describes it to Glory has, like, remained rent-free in my head for 10 years. She's like, it didn't mean anything. Like, I don't love her. I don't care. It's just mutual masturbation. There's a lot of sex in this story, man. But I find that connection of her and Deuce in that really interesting. And that's something I'm also interested in as I go through the story. When I get to those other 8 deadly sins, and not just necessarily like, okay, is wrath a sin that Blackjack deals with? Is vanity a sin Blackjack deals with? It's more of how similar is Blackjack to Cognitum? How similar is Blackjack to Amati? Etc., etc. And something I also talked about in that previous video is once you get to lucidity, that is the chapter that's like, hey, Blackjack, maybe none of this is real and you're just crazy, and like this is all something in your head to make you feel better or to kind of help you through your problems, which is brought back in the final chapter. But Blackjack is like, no, like, I've seen this shit before, Eater, you can't fool me, and it's promptly dismissed. And it's something for me, I'm like, I like that as an ending, though. Is that what Project Horizons is? Is Huffington Mount Celeste? It is this thing that Blackjack, this broken woman, this wounded woman, is trying to climb and conquer, and has to face herself and learn to love herself to be able to get through it. And I feel like, because one of the things I remember they talked about in Lucidity is that Blackjack was a victim of sexual assault. And I believe they said Steel Rain was the perpetrator. And I remember reading that and going, him? Not Deuce? And then Deuce was like an orderly that was trying to restrain her and help her. And I think she, like, cut his dick off because, of course she did. But it is the kind of thing where, like, if that's the case, the amount of sexual violence in Project Horizons makes a lot of sense. And the fact that her first big major antagonist, that being such a major aspect of his character, although he never does it to Blackjack, makes a lot of sense. Like, this is one of the first things she has to conquer, is the thing that actually happened to her. And I find that really interesting. So that's a lot of things I wanted to say. So now I want to get into some of those big picture moments that I recognize. Again, like, lines, observations that in the first chapter alone don't really mean much, and in hindsight go, oh. The first one is just the amount of ponies in Stable 99. It's 500. It's a pretty fucking important number for later. Not now. We're gonna put a pin in that, revisit it, and when we get to chapter 22, don't worry about it. The one thing I'm a little confused about is something Blackjack mentions, like the population is 500. It's always 500. And then, we get rid of someone and add someone new. So with P21 being retired, he doesn't get retired, but he's supposed to be retired. I don't know if that means we're at 500. When he gets retired, it's at 499, and then someone else can have a kid. Excuse me. Or if we're now at 501, which is why he needs to be retired, and we'll go down to 500. I'm working on the assumption that it's now at 501, and retiring him will even things out. So when we get to some of the numbers in 22, keep in mind that's the number I'm going with. A couple other things. I have like 12 things written here. That was number one. Introducing Scotch. Funny enough, Blackjack she's introduced to Blackjack in the reader before P21 even is. Scotch ends up becoming one of the main characters in the party. Also, they go ahead and just reveal that P21 is her dad, which was definitely an important part of their relationship. Not just the fact that they have a relationship, but Scotch being kind of like, so, you're my dad? Do we get to have a relationship? And then him going, no. You ever watch like Dragon's Ball P? It's basically that, Daddy, and it's like it pushing Gohan away. That's basically their relationship for book 2. I don't remember how it was at the start of part 3. I remember the MedX incident, which I made a note here that a couple big things, Daisy fucking up his leg because his limp is a part of his character, as well as the fact that he's given MedX a couple times, and it's a painkiller. Of course, he's gonna relax afterwards. Like, the MedX addiction is a really big deal. But yeah, I don't remember how close they were in part 3, but I remember him using the MedX for Scotch's operation after the killing joke, and Glory laying in, like, you fucking piece of shit. You are a piece of shit, but I've dealt with it because you're part of the team and we all trust you. Fuck you. That is your daughter. I know that you don't give a shit about that. That is your flesh and blood, and you are damning her to die because of your selfishness. That part was fucking cold, man. And I remember, at least in part 4 onwards, he and Scotch are like that. Like, I really like a lot of the character relationships. I'm not gonna get into that part, but I do like the relationships between most of the main cast. We do get a couple of the catchphrases showing up. I'm not an executioner. Security saves ponies. We see it also as like this big banner, like, we're security, we save ponies. I didn't count that as a catchphrase usage because A, it's not the same phrase, and 2, Blackjack doesn't say it, it's just something that she reads. However, after Blackjack takes a look at that, security, we save, she goes, I don't know if I'd ever really be the one to save 99. I'm like, I don't think the ponies at 99 would call you their savior either, Blackjack, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Scotch probably does, but that's like the one exception. When Blackjack is looking for the missing males, she's like, sometimes males will fight back, sometimes they'll hide. It's pretty rare, most of them just accept it. Every now and then one tries to commit suicide, but oh man, please don't find him hanging. I'm like, I don't think you have to worry about that yet, Blackjack. That's not for another, like, 23 chapters or so. Because I think it's after the Whisper, like, cage match fight is, I think that's when he tried to kill himself by hanging. Let's see, what else we got here? We have when she catches P21, he's like, you're a murderer, all of y'all are murderers, and just all those moments when he's just glaring at Blackjack or is notably scared of Blackjack because, as I said earlier, she beat his lover to death in front of him and doesn't even remember it. I talked about him fucking up his leg. There's this one line when Daisy, it's after the P21 incident, where she's like, Blackjack, one of these days I'm gonna have your head on a stick. I was like, oh, well, it's not Blackjack's head that she has on a stick, but it's the next best thing. Not actually gonna pour one out. I'm gonna drink one. I gotta pour one out for my homegirl gin rummy. It's like, I didn't like that. That wasn't fun, and that wasn't fun in hindsight. We actually get to see the Raider virus for the first time with some of the ponies with like they have like these beady yellow eyes that are just like chewing on themselves and shit. I'll probably talk more in depth about how I view the Raider virus later. This video's already almost an hour, which doesn't really surprise me. If you've seen my videos, you know I can talk about things, especially things I'm passionate about. And if there's one thing that I'm passionate about, I can talk about, it's Blackjack. But I will bring up that, yeah, having the Raider virus here in 99, that is very notable and very, very important. There's a scene when the Overmare is being raped, and Blackjack is specifically noting how horrifying that is. She's like, dude, this dude looks like he could, like, step on my skull and destroy it. He could kill me and clearly wouldn't give a fuck. I'd kind of rather that happen to me than being raped. And then, like, the ending of 33, it is something that happens, and I'm sorry, Blackjack. It's one of the most for me, it's one of the most memorable moments of the story. It's an important it's not one of those, from what I remember, there's a lot of fucked up shit in Horizons where I'm like, I don't know why it's here. It's just because it's an edgy grimdark story. It doesn't add a lot. It's kind of like the thing with Aster and Worm. Like, I get it, but I don't feel like it really had a big impact on the story or on the characters. Just kind of there. That moment has a lot of impact on Blackjack. Sanguine does get name dropped, so like we do get he is the main antagonist of the first half, because I think it is like when he dies in Hippocratic, that is about the halfway point of the narrative. There's a bit where Blackjack tells Daisy, like, look, let me go, blah, 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 you can kill me when I come back, and Daisy does certainly try. And the other thing is, as Blackjack's running out, she just yells, hey, Doofus! And Deuce just stops in place, like, oh, right, that's his name. Oh, right, that's his name. It's Doofus. That's a really fucking stupid name. Oh, I guess speaking of names, there's a point when, as Blackjack's starting her plan, Gin Rummy refers to her as Fishy, or like my little fishy. I'm like, oh, that's right, because that's her name. It's not Blackjack, it's Go Fish. And I just think that's kind of neat. So, those are just some of the big picture moments, like things that I noticed. Now getting on to the kill count. So, though, as I've said a few times, I want to count the kills in the story. I'm not killing random numbers. I'm not counting random monsters like rad roaches, scorpions, things like that. I'm counting generally just like sentient creatures, equines, like the ponies, the zebras, diamond dogs count. Robots are probably more of a case-by-case basis. Like, Cognitum counts, she is a character. I don't remember how many other, like, robots and AI there are in the story. I feel like there's a few, but I might just be making that up. I don't know. But that'll probably be more of, like, a case-by-case basis. To me, we have to either see their body, we have to either, like, directly know the character, see their body, or see the aftermath for it to count. Like, for example, in this chapter, they mentioned duct tape. Like, this is someone who had died. She's Scotch's mom. And I was on the fence, like, do I count her or not? And I decided I'm not gonna count her. because we don't actually see her. And then not long after I made that decision, we get the audio logs where we actively hear Duct Tape talk, and we hear her talking to the Overmare with P21. Of course, we hear her having sex because Project Horizons. And I was like, okay, since we're actually hearing her, we essentially get to see her character. Now she gets to go on the count. So in situations like that, like if we see someone in like in a memory orb, like the Loyalty, Love, and Secrets, like janitor that gets killed, like that one counts. If we just hear, if it's more vague, I feel like when we get into like some of the terminals and shit, that will be kind of a case-by-case basis. We'll see. But as far as chapter 1 goes, I counted 27 kills. There's a lot in just the first chapter. Duct Tape, who died previously, but we did get to see her. U10, whose head explodes. There's a Raider. Is Raider number 1, because some of these didn't have names. Raider number 1 that Blackjack killed. There's a couple where they mention a bloody pitbuck, and the implication is that it was taken from a dead pony. I'm counting those as kills. There's also a moment when Blackjack is in the atrium and she notes like all the smears and the blood. She's like, that looks like that's at least a dozen ponies. So I just said, okay, I'm counting 12. And all of these deaths that are from 99 that I counted, I did go ahead and subtract from the 500 number. Because again, that's a very important number. I kind of went ahead and took care of that now. 27 total kills. Blackjack herself, oh, sorry, the dogs. Blackjack herself has 7 kills at this point. So, where's the Journey? Come on, Journey. Go. Okay, as I was saying, Blackjack herself has 7 at this point. So, like I said, outside of like the 40 from play and the 400 whatever in sorry, my brain just fucking stopped. In 22, I'm kind of just saying, all right, let's say that's 500 total. To hit 1,000, she has to get about 6.5 per chapter. She's on pace for 1,000, which is fucking bonkers, man. But there's that. And as for the catchphrase count, like I said, I'm not a smart pony. Was close, but it was never phrased quite right, so it's not on the count. Annie Up was never used, but we get 1 use of I'm not an executioner, and we get 1 use of security saves ponies. So that was chapter 1 of Project Horizons. Excuse me, like I said at the start, 79 more to go. I haven't started chapter 2 yet. I would like to start it tonight, but I don't know. But hopefully I will be able to start and finish it tomorrow.